Home prices in your city are slipping, but the cost of keeping that home is quietly exploding. Mortgage payments may finally feel negotiable again, yet water bills, insurance premiums, taxes, and utility fees are climbing in the opposite direction. What looks like affordability on a listing page can quickly turn into a financial trap once the monthly costs begin to surface. This is not a story about houses losing value overnight. It is a story about cities where the price of survival is rising faster than incomes, while buyers are told the worst is already over. So here's the question no realtor wants to answer. Which American cities are making homeowners poorer precisely when homes appear cheaper? For most of the past decade, the American housing market ran on a simple formula: cheap money, rapid migration, and the belief that demand would always outrun supply. That formula has now broken down, quietly, unevenly, and with consequences that are only beginning to surface. Interest rates reversed first. After years of near-zero borrowing costs, monthly payments doubled in many markets within a short window. Buyers did not disappear, but their leverage did. Sellers lost pricing power. Listings stayed longer. Price cuts became normal again. Then migration flipped. The pandemic-era rush into Sunbelt cities created the illusion of permanent demand. Builders responded aggressively. Between 2021 and 2024, metros across the South and West approved tens of thousands of new units, assuming population growth would continue uninterrupted. But as remote work stabilized and costs surged, inflows slowed or reversed, leaving excess supply chasing fewer qualified buyers. At the same time, institutional investors began pulling back. The math no longer worked. Rent growth cooled, financing tightened, and exit liquidity vanished. Homes once purchased as cash flow assets became liabilities the moment vacancy rose or refinancing windows closed. In past housing corrections, falling prices restored balance. This cycle is different. Today, prices can fall while ownership becomes more expensive. Insurance premiums are rising due to climate risk. Property taxes are adjusting upward to fund strained local budgets. Utility costs, especially water, are climbing as infrastructure fails to keep pace with growth and environmental stress. This is the critical shift most buyers miss. Affordability is no longer just about the purchase price. It is about whether a city can sustainably support the people who live there, financially, structurally, and ecologically. In the cities we are about to examine, the warning signs are no longer theoretical. They are showing up in longer listing times, stalled developments, rising monthly expenses, and residents quietly leaving despite cheaper homes. If you want to understand where this market is truly heading and how these pressures affect real people on the ground, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. What comes next are 7 case studies that reveal how fragile today's housing market has become. 1. Phoenix. For years, Phoenix was the symbol of modern American growth. Affordable homes, endless land, and a steady flow of newcomers escaping higher-cost states turned the Valley of the Sun into one of the fastest-growing metro areas in the country. Builders raced ahead. Subdivisions spread outward, prices followed. Then the water model collapsed. In 2023, Arizona's Department of Water Resources stopped issuing new development approvals for projects relying solely on groundwater. The reason was not political, and it was not speculative. State modeling showed there was no guaranteed 100-year water supply to support continued expansion. In other words, the foundation of Phoenix's growth story was officially declared insufficient. The housing market felt the impact almost immediately. Home values softened as listings sat longer, and buyer urgency faded. Projects that once depended on future population growth stalled. Land purchased at peak optimism suddenly carried regulatory uncertainty. A home could still be sold, but the neighborhood promised around it might never be built. The deeper problem is structural. Phoenix expanded under the assumption that water could always be engineered into existence. But engineering solutions take time, political coordination, and money. Meanwhile, insurance costs have risen alongside climate risk, and utility expenses continue to climb even as prices stagnate. For homeowners, this creates a trap. Selling means accepting lower offers. Staying means absorbing rising monthly costs in a city whose growth engine has been legally constrained. Investors face an even harsher reality. Exit liquidity depends on future demand, and that demand now depends on water permits that may never return at scale. So what exactly is a house worth in a city where the state itself has questioned the viability of long-term growth? And if Phoenix, the heart of the modern Sunbelt, can hit this wall, who is next? 2. Las Vegas. Las Vegas has always thrived on risk. Speculation, leverage, and bold assumptions are woven into its identity. For decades, that formula worked, until the math began to change. Nearly 90% of southern Nevada's water supply comes from a single source: the Colorado River, stored in Lake Mead. As water levels dropped year after year, Las Vegas responded with what many experts consider the most aggressive conservation program in the country. Lawns were removed. Indoor water was recycled at near total rates. Residents were fined for waste. On paper, the system became a global model. That is precisely the problem. Las Vegas is now operating at peak efficiency, with no meaningful buffer left. Conservation has been exhausted, yet growth has not stopped. New housing developments continue to be approved. Tourism remains the economic backbone, bringing tens of millions of visitors each year into a desert city already stretched to its limits. In the housing market, the tension is visible. Prices have softened, listings linger longer, and investor appetite has cooled, especially for short-term rentals that once defined the city's post-pandemic boom. At the same time, water and utility costs continue to rise, quietly inflating the true cost of ownership, even as asking prices come down. Homeowners are squeezed from both sides. Sellers cannot command peak prices anymore. Buyers face monthly expenses that no longer match the promise of cheap desert living. Investors who built models on endless demand now confront a market where every additional resident increases systemic risk. Las Vegas has mastered crisis management, but it has not solved the crisis itself. There is no second river, no backup reservoir, no technological breakthrough waiting in reserve. So when a city is already doing everything right and still falling behind, what happens next? And how do you price real estate in a place where failure doesn't come suddenly but all at once? 3. Los Angeles. Los Angeles has always sold an image of abundance. Sunlight, opportunity, and endless growth wrapped into one of the most expensive housing markets in America. A median home price hovering near $1 million creates an expectation that basic necessities at the very least are secure. Water is not one of them. Los Angeles relies on a fragile mix of local aqueducts, groundwater, and imported water from the Colorado River and Northern California. Each of those sources is under stress. Snowpack has become unreliable. River allocations are shrinking. Groundwater reserves are under pressure. Yet development continues and prices remain elevated. The real shift is happening quietly, through costs most buyers underestimate. Water rates have been approved for consecutive increases, with multi-year hikes already locked in. Infrastructure assessments, dormant for decades, are returning. These are not hypothetical future risks. They are line items showing up on monthly bills. In the housing market, this creates a growing disconnect. Prices are no longer rising aggressively, but the cost of owning continues to climb. Sellers resist price cuts because replacement housing is just as expensive. Buyers hesitate because affordability calculations no longer stop at the mortgage payment. For long-term residents, the pressure is cumulative. Insurance premiums rise with climate exposure. Utility bills trend upward. Property taxes adjust to fund aging systems stretched beyond design limits. What once felt like a premium lifestyle increasingly resembles a slow financial bleed. Investors face a similar dilemma. Rental demand remains strong, but margins shrink as operating costs rise faster than rents. Appreciation alone can no longer justify the numbers. Los Angeles is not running out of houses. It is running into the limits of what people can afford to sustain. And if this is the cost of living in America's most iconic market, what happens in the cities that cannot pass those costs on as easily? 4. San Diego. San Diego looks like the exception to every housing rule. Perfect weather, a stable job base, and some of the highest quality of life metrics in the country have long insulated it from serious corrections. Buyers are willing to pay a premium for consistency. What most of them overlook is geography. San Diego produces very little of its own water. Between 85 and 90% of the supply is imported from hundreds of miles away, primarily through the State Water Project and the Colorado River system. That places the city at the very end of the pipeline. Any shortage upstream hits San Diego first and leaves it last in line for relief. To manage that risk, the region invested heavily in desalination. The technology works, but it is extraordinarily expensive. Operating costs are high, energy-intensive, and permanent. As traditional sources become less reliable, dependence on this costly water only increases. The housing market is already absorbing the impact. Prices have stopped accelerating, listings take longer to clear, and buyers are more cautious than the headlines suggest. Yet water bills rank among the highest in the nation and continue to rise. For many households, utilities now rival insurance as the fastest-growing monthly expense. This creates a dangerous imbalance. A buyer may secure $1 million home with a manageable mortgage, only to discover that the ongoing cost of living erodes financial flexibility year after year. Renters feel it too as landlords pass rising operating costs downstream. San Diego's problem is not collapse, it is compression. Margins are tightening for homeowners, investors, and renters alike. The city remains desirable, but desirability no longer guarantees affordability. And when a market known for stability starts to strain under its own infrastructure costs, the question becomes unavoidable. How long can prices stay high in a city where every gallon of water must be earned the hard way? 5. Scottsdale. Scottsdale represents the polished face of desert prosperity. Manicured landscapes, luxury developments, and some of the highest home prices in Arizona have long signaled stability and exclusivity. In a region defined by scarcity, Scottsdale marketed control. Then in 2023, the illusion cracked. Facing unprecedented drought conditions and tightening water projections, the city made a decisive move. It shut off water deliveries to the neighboring community of Rio Verde foothills. Hundreds of homes, many newly built, were suddenly left without a reliable water supply, forced to rely on expensive trucked-in water just to function. This was not a warning, it was a precedent. Scottsdale demonstrated something the housing market rarely prices in. When resources become scarce, access is enforced by jurisdiction, not need. Home ownership outside protected boundaries became a liability overnight. Properties that once sold on lifestyle promises lost liquidity as financing dried up and buyers walked away. Inside Scottsdale, prices remain elevated, but the signal has changed. The city has shown it will protect its own residents first, even if that means cutting others off entirely. For buyers, this raises uncomfortable questions about long-term security. Luxury does not create water, it only secures priority. For investors, the message is even clearer. Returns now depend not just on demand and supply, but on political decisions about who gets access to essential infrastructure. That is not a risk easily modeled. Scottsdale did not run out of water, it ran out of tolerance. And if scarcity forces cities to choose who stays connected and who does not, what happens to property values on the wrong side of the line? 6. Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City has long projected stability. Clean streets, strong employment, and a dramatic mountain backdrop helped push home values steadily higher. For many buyers, it felt like a safer alternative to the overheated coastal markets. That sense of security is now under strain. Just miles from downtown, the Great Salt Lake continues to shrink. Decades of water diversion for agriculture and urban use have pushed the lake toward historic lows. As the shoreline retreats, it exposes vast stretches of dry lakebed contaminated with industrial byproducts accumulated over generations. Arsenic, mercury, heavy metals. When seasonal winds pick up, that dust does not stay at the lake. It moves directly into surrounding communities. This is no longer an abstract environmental concern. It is a public health risk tied directly to water management decisions. The housing implications are subtle but serious. Salt Lake City depends heavily on mountain snowpack, fed by lake effect weather patterns. As the lake declines, snowfall becomes less reliable. Less snow means less water flowing into reservoirs that serve the entire metro area. Prices have not collapsed, but momentum has slowed. Buyers are asking more questions. Insurance providers are reassessing long-term exposure. Families considering relocation weigh not just mortgage costs, but air quality, health risks, and infrastructure resilience. For homeowners, the trap is familiar. Selling means giving up a low-rate mortgage. Staying means betting that environmental pressures will not intensify. Investors face shrinking margins as future uncertainty grows harder to ignore. Salt Lake City's risk is not dramatic scarcity yet. It is compounding vulnerability. And when a city's water problem begins to threaten both drinking supply and breathable air, how do you calculate long-term value? 7. Buckeye. Buckeye was marketed as the next great American growth story. Cheap land, brand new homes, and master-planned communities promised a future filled with schools, parks, shopping centers, and rising property values. For first-time buyers priced out of Phoenix, it looked like a second chance. Then the paperwork caught up with reality. Buckeye's explosive growth relied on groundwater assumptions that the state of Arizona later deemed insufficient. After the same water modeling that halted approvals across the Phoenix region, much of Buckeye's long-term expansion was effectively erased on paper. Planned neighborhoods were left in limbo. Approved maps no longer guaranteed buildable futures. This is not a temporary drought problem, it is a legal one. Homes that already exist still have water, for now. But their value was underwritten by a promise of continued development. More residents, more services, more demand. When that promise disappears, so does the logic supporting price appreciation. The housing market reflects the shift. Listings linger. Buyers hesitate. Appraisals become conservative as uncertainty replaces optimism. Investors who bought early expecting a fast flip now face holding costs without a clear exit timeline. For residents, the risk is psychological as much as financial. Living in a half-finished community changes perceptions. Empty lots remain empty. Infrastructure arrives slower than promised. Confidence erodes quietly. Buckeye is not collapsing because people stopped moving in. It is stalling because the future it sold may never arrive. And when a home's value depends on growth that regulators have already canceled, what exactly are you paying for? When cheaper homes still cost more. Taken individually, none of these 7 cities are collapsing overnight. There are no mass foreclosures, no sudden disappearances of entire neighborhoods. On the surface, many of these markets still look functional. That is what makes this cycle dangerous. Across Phoenix, Las Vegas, Los Angeles, San Diego, Scottsdale, Salt Lake City, and Buckeye, the same pattern keeps repeating. Prices soften, but the cost of ownership keeps rising. Growth slows, but the financial commitments remain fixed. Infrastructure strains, yet buyers are still encouraged to believe the worst is behind them. The common denominator is not water alone, it is belief. Belief that growth is permanent. Belief that resources can always be engineered. Belief that prices only move in one direction. For years, those beliefs rewarded speculation, leverage, and speed. Today, they are colliding with physical limits, regulatory reality, and rising fixed costs that no refinancing can erase. This is not a market where patience automatically pays off. It is a market where assumptions matter more than timing. Buying a home is no longer just a bet on location or appreciation. It is a bet on whether a city can sustain itself financially, environmentally, and politically for decades. The lesson is uncomfortable but necessary. Affordability is not created by lower listing prices alone. It depends on stability, infrastructure, and honest growth models. When those break, the math breaks with them. So the real question is not whether this is a short-term correction or the start of a longer cycle. The real question is this: how many American cities are still selling a future that quietly no longer exists? If you live in one of these markets or are thinking about buying, share your experience in the comments. And if you want to stay ahead of the next shift, like the video, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The signs are already there.